You're not only fighting the cancer, you took up the cause to try to make sure that women knew about their breast density. And you are the definition of never underestimate the power of an individual voice. How did you start this attack? I mean, you now have gotten legislation passed in 22 states?
Yeah.
And it started right here in your home state,
It did.
Connecticut.
It started in Connecticut. Well, Joan, when you get hit with a disease, a serious disease, it's a family affair, as you know, affects your whole family. I mean, I was devastated. And what really bothered me was that I followed all the rules. And I found something that to me was an injustice. Now, all my life in my career, I mean, this is not my career, talking about breasts all over the globe. My career was an educator. And I spent time working with kids with disabilities and giving them equal access and fighting an injustice. And I felt like I was on the same route for cancer, the same road. And so my initial discovery of the research was not to say, I'm going to start an organization and I'm going to talk to everybody about this. I wanted to help my family, my friends, my co-workers, folks in my state. So I went back to my docs now. I had a team of them, 6. And I brought the research. I'm thinking they don't know this stuff. I'm going to tell them. I'm going to be the teacher, Nancy, and tell them. They knew it. They just said, it's not the standard, Nancy. I said, could you do me a favor? Can you start telling the 40% of women that come to see you about if they have dense tissue and what that means? Oh, no, we're not going to do that. We don't tell women that.
But that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I remember just recently reading about when First Lady Betty Ford got breast cancer, and everybody said, don't talk about it. We've never talked about it. And back then, doctors actually wouldn't tell women that they had breast cancer because they couldn't do anything about it. And so they just didn't want to upset them, didn't want to increase their anxiety. And she was one of the first ones that had chemotherapy, and certainly one of the first that came out and talked about it. But when you think about the spans of time, and here we are today, and we're still fighting this.
Yes.
We're still fighting to try to get women just to be told that a mammogram won't work on them.
Right.
That's all we're really talking about.
Exactly. It's, as we talked about earlier, it's about consumer. We're the patient consumer.
Yeah.
Nothing's free. We're purchasing this tool. Why do we do that? Why do we go for screening? The only reason is to find cancer in the unlikely event that we have it, we're going to find it early. That's the whole purpose. It's not to see my imager or talk to the technologist. That's the reason. So if you have a tool that has limits in women with dense tissue, as a consumer, I should know that. I should be protected. I should get all the benefits, and we know there are benefits. I'm still a consumer of mammogram, as you are. I have a good breast. I still have my yearly mammogram. I still have my ultrasound yearly, and I have an MRI every other year. We should know about the risks and benefits of every test. It's our right to have that. Yet, we have a lot of opposition.
Why are you getting resistance? Because you've gotten the law passed in 22 states, so you have, how many, 28 states to go? What's the resistance?
Well, the resistance is, in out of 22 states, 21 of them we've had huge resistance. One state, Hawaii, passed beautifully. Not a lot of problems. It just made it without any challenges, which I was surprised because usually there's always a challenge. The resistance. We don't like mandated medicine. It's not medicine.
It's consumer fraud. It's consumer protection. I mean, in my way of looking at it, if there was a medicine that came out on the market and it didn't work for 45% of the people who took it, can you imagine what that commercial would sound like on television?
Exactly.
And I mean, if you did a commercial for this, or wouldn't you have to say that,
Oh, by the way.
Oh, by the way, if you have dense tissue in your breast, for 45% of you, it won't work.
All we're looking for is somewhat of a warning label. You have a warning label on kitty litter. You have a warning label on prescription drugs. We can't get, by the way, as the density of your breast increases, the reliability of your mammogram decreases. Talk to your docs about what is right for you. Talk about your risk. We're talking about conversation. And I will tell you, having density legislation in 22 states does not replace a physician and a provider and the patient having educated conversations about what her risk is and what she should do and what her preferences are. It is the first step. It is by no means replacing the conversations in the examining room.
All right, because I'll tell you that I was discussing this with someone recently, and they said our issue with passing this law and having federal legislation, which of course would make this necessary in every state, is that women are going to get this letter and it'll be out of context. In other words, they'll get a letter that says you have dense breasts and maybe another test is necessary, and that they're going to get all scared, but they won't really understand it or know what to do about it. What do you say to that?
Hogwash. Here's what I say. Physicians know what state they live in. Yes, do we have to give them a GPS? They will know if they have a density reporting. In fact, there are physicians across this country, Joan, thank goodness for them, that are telling women regardless of whether they have a law or not. I mean, doesn't that make the most sense?
Yeah.
Why do we have to have legislation? I agree with the docs. Start telling women voluntarily, oh, no, we can't do that. Well, then we're going to have legislation. So I will tell them, when you see your patient, you have information. You send a brochure out. You put things in the examining room. You have a conversation. Wouldn't that be unique? And say, oh, by the way, we have a new law. While we know that density has been around for a long time, we are mandated now to tell you, and let's talk about what that means for you. How hard is that? Do they want me to go into every examining room? Sure, I'll buy me a ticket. I'll go. I mean, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It is hogwash.
I know you've talked with a lot of gynecologists and OBGYNs. And we should say, as a group, everybody says, oh, it's got to be the insurance industry that's against this because they're going to have to pay for the ultrasound. And the answer to that is it's far less expensive to pay for that ultrasound than it is to pay for treatment of somebody who doesn't find their cancer until it's in stage 3 or stage 4. That's expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
But it really hasn't been the insurance companies as much as it has been the organization of gynecologists and OBGYNs.
Yeah, it's the physician trade organizations that really.
Is it because this now lands back in their laps as a responsibility, and could there then be potentially a liability issue?
Well,
why are they so resistant?
Well, I would think that there's more liability in not disclosing information than disclosing too much, don't you think? I mean, I think disclosing it actually helps them with their liability because women at least get that information. You want to be, it's our report. We paid for it. We need it. I think that some of the resistance is they just don't want like mandated laws or mandated, they call it mandated medical medicine. And it's short-sighted because, again, it should be a woman's right to have this information. I will tell you there are many gynecologists that I know that, again, do tell women, do have conversations, but we want to standardize this because we don't want to leave any woman behind. And there's nothing worse than having I would trade a false positive, an extra biopsy, a little prick here and there, than a late stage diagnosis, Joan. You know, find me in 5 years. If I'm still alive, I'll be jumping for joy. But, I still am at risk of dying prematurely from this disease. And I am ticked off about that.
And you should be. And, as a standard in this country, you hear reports on TV all the time. Know your numbers. You're supposed to know your height, your weight, your blood pressure, your cholesterol level. This is a number that every woman in America should know. And there was an interactive Harris study done, and it said that 95% of women in America do not know their breast density. In fact, many of them don't even know what that term means or why they should care about it. However, let me just point out, this just came out, New York Times, I know you're very well aware of this, in the Annals of Internal Medicine, it says that only about half of the women who have the dense tissue, let's remember that's 45% of American women, that only about half of those are necessarily at high risk that are going to need the extra test, the ultrasound or the MRI. So unless they fit into a category with risk factors, then, it's just spending too much money testing too many people.
Right. And this sounds like a passage from the Old Testament, like King Solomon. Should we cut the baby in half? I mean, what do you mean only half? So who's the half? Is it you? You've dense tissue, or is it me?
I would not have been considered to be in that half because I didn't have enough other risk factors.
Exactly.
I didn't have the BRCA gene. I didn't have family history. I didn't have a lot of those risk factors. So I probably would have been overlooked, and here I am. I would have been one that would have come up with look. I'm outside of the parameters of anyone who would normally get triple negative breast cancer. That's usually African American, Latino, young, and I don't fit in that category. But hey, guess what? I got it.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think that when you look at the science, 85% of women that have breast cancer have no risk factors. So, should we just not do anyone who's at average risk, that's you or me, and only concentrate on the 15% then? I mean,
well, then both you and I would have prematurely died.
Yeah, well, especially we didn't have the second one. Well, think about this. I had yearly mammograms. I basically had no screening.
Yeah.
Right? For 11 years. Pretended
Same
screening.
Me. I had 2 decades of the screenings.
Yeah.
And had I not gone to do, on a fluke, an interview with Dr. Susan Love about mammograms, and she said to me, wait a minute, do I hear you telling me that you have dense breasts? And I said, yeah, they're always calling me back in for more, we need more films. We can't see anything in your films. And she said, well, then you have to have an ultrasound. Had she not told me that,
I know.
I never would have known to get an ultrasound.
And again, we shouldn't have to rely upon luck to find our cancer. Hence why we're doing it state by state. And of course, as you know, Joan, you were down in Washington with us, involved on a national level. We have to get this information to women. Listen, if docs were routinely telling women, I would be now on the golf course today instead of talking to Joan London here. I mean, we need to get this information. And the only way to do it that I know how to do it is through state legislation, federal legislation, and FDA, Mammography Quality Standards Act changes.
But let's just talk about that for just a minute, because in the beginning, this was taken to the FDA, because the FDA is the one that's supposed to be there to protect us against drugs that don't work. How long have they had it now? 4 years?
3.5 years. We're looking for 4 sentences. I taught kids with disabilities. I could have had 4 sentences written by them in a week. So I don't know. It's wheels of government go really slowly. Hence why we're accelerating this. We have to get this to women. It's ridiculous.
So not being able to get the FDA to move and to do this, to protect women, then the efforts were turned toward federal legislation.
Right.
And bills were drawn up exactly the same in both the Senate and the House. These aren't Republican issues or Democrat issues. No. It's nonpartisan. They don't cost anybody any money. And they were put before the House last year and not passed. Now they've been put before both the Senate and the House again this year. But you're having a tough time getting people to sign on.
Yeah, I think we're having an easier time now that Joan London has been diagnosed.
I'm stomping those halls a little bit these days.
Yes, with breast cancer.
I even accost congressmen at Races for the Cure and say, funny, I was in your office. You told me you were going to sign that bill and you didn't. And both of them came back to Washington and signed the bill.
I don't think it's unique in some respect. If you look at our committee, the committee that we're in, our 2 laws, our 2 bills, the Senate committee that the bill is in, there's about 1,000 bills. So it really takes an effort, a focused effort. I've been working with a government relations team that I've actually paid to work on this for 4 years now through our organizations, Are You Dense and Are You Dense Advocacy. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. But the only way, again, out of the 3 ways, we want a national standard. And again, let's get together. Let's sit down. Let's hash out the language. We're reasonable people. Just get us the information.
In the meantime, what do women do?
Well, the first thing a woman needs to do, whether or not she's in a state with a density reporting law or not, she needs to talk to her referring doctor and get copies of that real report, Joan, that I mentioned to you. The report that's generated by the radiologist to the referring doctor. She needs to then find out if she has dense tissue, and if she does. And even if she doesn't, you always have to have conversations with your doctor about your own personal screening surveillance and what is right for you.
Who do you get that from? Do you get that report from the radiology lab or from your referring doctor?
I got mine from my referring doctor because my referring doctor is ordering it, prescribing it to the imaging. So I don't go directly to the imaging facility. I go to the gynecologist or my referring doctor. I would suggest to women that women go to the referring doctor because that's the report that is generated based on their prescription for a mammogram.
And I'm going to be the first to admit, when I get my reports, and I haven't even looked at them. I mean,
I know.
I look at the first paragraph. It says whether or not you have cancer.
Right.
And then there's like all these other paragraphs. I mean, come on, do you really read to the very last?
No.
I mean, maybe you do. I never knew I needed to read to the end. But now we're here to tell you, you have to search on that report to find out whether or not you have dense breasts. And there's no other way you're going to know, right? Unless you see that report.
Yeah, unless you see the report or the physician. And again, there are physicians that do routinely tell women without having to have a mandate because they really understand it and they do not want to do any harm because density has harmed me and it certainly has harmed you.
But we're kind of in a quagmire on this issue. And I think that women are going to be frustrated. I don't want to leave you frustrated as to, like, so why isn't anything being done? What's kind of happened is that people like Nancy Capello and all of the others that are pushing this issue and making state by state, give women the report. And in some states, they've also been successful in making insurance companies pay for that next test because that's a huge part of this. We've kind of gotten the debate and the effort has kind of got ahead of the science, or at least it's gotten ahead of the medical industry. Because the next question is, okay, so now we just found out you have very dense breasts. Now what? And this is where a mammogram is incredibly standardized. An ultrasound is somewhat technician dependent. And I think that the medical profession is not quite ready to say what next. Am I right in that? Is that part of this issue?
I do think you're right. It's really hysterical in some respect. Because so when we go into a state and we working on legislation, we hear from docs, we don't want these mandated. We don't want you to tell us what to do. All we're asking for is information. Once they get the information, then they come to me and say, we don't really know what to. Now you want me to tell you what to say. So make up your mind. You can't have it both ways. I think that we know that the science is already here. The challenge is, like every technology or every tool, there's a benefit and there's a risk. There's a challenge. So let's take ultrasound, for example. There's 20 plus years of research that shows that if you add an ultrasound, and we have Connecticut research, you add an ultrasound to a woman with a normal mammogram, you are going to increase detection of invasive cancers. Even the U.S. Preventive Task Force came out with that. Mostly invasive cancers. Those are the ones we want to find. Those are the killing cancers. However, there's the downside. You may have some false positives. You may have to be called back. Well, again, you tell any woman who has had breast cancer or a family member who have lost a woman with breast cancer, they will tell you that they'd rather have a false positive any day than a missed positive. I know the science is there. It's the will. It's not the skill. It's the will.
There is now, I believe, a breast density assessment, software, which can be added to a mammogram?
Yes. Yeah, there's probably 4 or 5 manufacturers that are producing density software, a standardization of density that is FDA approved, where it can standardize the category of density. So regardless of whether Dr. Smith or Dr. Capella or Dr. London's reading it, it's going to say it's going to be a C or an A or a B or a D. And that's phenomenal because we hear from a lot of critics, well, it's not standardized. Even the United States Preventive Task Force said that any given year, 12 to 18% of the current dense breast tissue composition could be changed within the following year. And that could be because of the difference in...
As you age.
Exactly. It could be because of that, too. It's not just because it's being read differently. So that's positive. That's helpful.
exactly what will the Breast Density Act make happen? The federal legislation.
Well, when the federal legislation is passed, I'm going to rescue a dog. So that's the first thing that's going to happen, because I need time to do that. So that's the first thing. The legislation will standardize the communication of density to the patient, really, what we try to do in every state. It will be the same language. And again, once it passes, there still has to be the Health and Human Services Secretary gets together with advocates in cancer organizations and medical organizations to develop the language. So it's not going to be just a slam dunk right out of the gate. But within time, and I'm hoping within a few months, we'll have standardized language, and every woman, regardless of whether she lives in Alaska or in South Dakota, will have information upon her results of her mammogram that will tell her about what her specific breast tissue composition is.
And that's a baby step, because that still doesn't mean that
step.
your insurance is going to pay for that, which is ironic because there is legislation federally that insists that insurance companies pay for preventive mammograms.
Right.
But if they don't work for 45% of women,
Exactly.
then don't we need legislation that says that insurance companies also have to pay
Right.
for that other test that will work for those other 45% of women?
This is the first step, but the reason why we didn't attach, as you know, a monetary or a fiscal note, it would be really a long time before that would ever pass. So this is really free. There's no cost to the government. You add 3 more sentences in a report. How hard is that? Just give us our information. We paid for it. We can put our big girl pants on. We can hear the information. And the whole point of it is we all want to stay healthy. And what's so ironic in many respects, Joan, is the women that I hear all over the country that find me upon a late stage diagnosis because they follow all the rules. These are women who have done everything right. They exercise, they eat healthy, and the majority of them, of course, like the majority of women who get breast cancer, don't have any risk factors. And they are shocked. And the sad thing is, we've lost about 4 or 5 women that I've been working with in states. Their cancers either were found at stage 4 upon diagnosis, never missed an appointment, or stage 3, traveled to stage 4 and end up dying from the disease.
But the science is growing exponentially.
That's important.
Literally at lightning speed. We are learning, and it's because of a lot of women like Nancy, that more funds are going to breast cancer research than to any other kind of cancer. So we are learning from week to week. We know more, and of course with the hopes of making sure that we can take care of everyone who is living with cancer,
absolutely.
so that it becomes a chronic illness, but
exactly.
not a fatal disease.
We want a cure for sure.
Yes,
but in light of
absolutely.
a cure, could you please let us understand that there's something about our breasts that may get in the way of our cancer being found early, even though year after year we go for those yearly mammograms.
Nancy, thank you.
Oh, Joan.
Thank you.
Thank you so
for
much.
sharing your story.
Thank you for sharing your story.
From survivor to survivor.
Yeah, thanks.